I can hear you now.
Yep. Yeah, I'm coming through. Yeah, all right, guys. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the share here to get you guys over to just the main screen here to get started. This session will be recorded, and if you want on this main screen here, I'm putting up. You can take a look and go and write down if you like, write down my email. If you have to leave at some point during, or if you want to make sure that you get the link, or I can send you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation as well. So this presentation is anxiety in children. And really, when I put this presentation together, my focus was an audience primarily of parents and caregivers. But it can be extended really to anybody that's supporting the development of a child, okay? So as far as the definition of anxiety, really we're talking about worry or fear. And it's important to realize that we have a natural foundation for anxiety and fear, that it's a part of our biology, probably one of our older part of the brain. And it's there to assess for danger, and for our bodies to respond, really for life-saving situations. And it's just developed over the course of many thousands of years. And really we now, with worry and fear, take it to everything else that comes at us. So there's a natural level of anxiety. What we're kind of talking about here is when that gets a little bit beyond the norm and how to deal with some of those so that it doesn't get excessive. When we talk in the mental health field about anxiety disorders, it's when we're talking about an anxiety that exists, that persists and intensifies over time. So when this worry or fear exceeds what is reasonable in response to the situation, and it begins to interfere with daily activities, that's when we start to look more in the mental health field as far as a diagnosis. I think it's important to realize that child anxiety disorders are a medical condition that are diagnosed in about 1 out of every 8 children here in the US. So that's a medical condition, that's a diagnosed anxiety disorder. That's not just some anxiety. The different categories or types of anxiety disorders, general anxiety disorder, which is somebody that's experiencing the anxiousness about most things on most days. Then you move into social anxieties, phobias. Phobias can be fear of one particular thing in one particular situation. Obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and separation anxiety. That post-traumatic stress disorder, that trauma can apply to many of life situations, particularly anything that the individual does not have the emotional capacity to endure. And you guys will also be able to see some of the notes I have at the bottom. So some symptoms of anxiety, aka stress. And again, we're looking more towards, okay, now this is getting a little excessive. Restlessness, fatigue, because that anxiety can kind of sit underneath the surface for periods of time and just exhaust you physically. Not wanting to go to school, that fear. Difficulty concentrating or changing thought. Worry is often about what might happen in the future or what did happen in the past. So that concentration, it's more focused usually on what might happen or what did happen. Irritability. Think about it, if you have that stress even from the day, a lot of these translate through our lives into adulthood. If you have that irritability, then you're not going to be able to make that upstairs decisions. It's not going to be as efficient. So you're going to make poor choices, poor decisions. And in childhood, you're going to get into trouble doing things. Changes in grades, that's something that's more over a period of time. So if you're recognizing a large change in grade from one term to the next with children, that's a very good sign, indication that anxiety is present. Difficulty sleeping, insomnia. Upset stomach or frequently sad. I know those two aren't quite synonymous, but I had to fit it all in. So the frequently sad, I want to touch base on that because this is focused on anxiety, but depression is less common in children, but it's still something that's there. And it's important to know the path. If you feel lack of control, then that obviously that translates to hopelessness. And that can kind of take into that decreased self-esteem. So if you're feeling hopelessness, and those things kind of lead to the path of depression. Nightmares, headaches, muscle tension, and then decrease in appetite. Decrease in appetite or change in food. Sometimes you may, and again, this is something that will translate into adults with anxiety, you see a decrease in appetite, or you could see certain other eating behaviors. Maybe they start to eat when stressed, right? We don't do that. Child anxiety versus adult anxiety. Separation anxiety is very common in young children, especially when they first start going to school. Frequent nightmares and disturbed sleep. Constant restlessness. Sleepiness or falling asleep in school, that goes to that exhaustion kind of thing. When that anxiety kind of stays present under the surface over a period of time, you're going to get that, especially if you're also getting that disturbed sleep. Difficulty concentrating, staying on task. Irritability. They display this a little bit differently, children versus adults. Crying and tantrums. But even with adults, I think you can kind of translate where that goes to. It's not like you haven't seen an adult had a tantrum, right? The ability to recognize, rationalize, and express how one is feeling. That is very unique to the children's situation, because the frontal lobe of a child doesn't fully develop until you're about mid-20s. So they don't have the same intellectual capacity as an adult to rationalize, recognize, express how they're feeling as it is, even without the anxiety or stressful situation in front of them. Adults develop chronic pain and may turn to alcohol and drugs for coping and soothing. So those are some things that move more into the adult category. But we spoke briefly about the path to depression. What do you think comes in as an adult, if not as a teenager, on the path to depression? Alcohol and drugs. And what is the most concerning symptom of depression? Suicide. And one of the peak times for suicide is in teens, 13 to 18, 13 to 20. So anxiety is a starting point, and it's important to kind of recognize it and do something about it. What a child will worry about. Family problems. Yes. Believe it or not, I think a lot of families that I see, especially divorced families, I think the perception is that children, this is just a part of their life, they're young, and they're just adapting to the changes. And that's one of the biggest changes in terms of anxiety, in terms of emotional disturbance and development. It comes from family problems. And I think the first thing I think of is divorce, but there's many other things that can happen within the family, obviously. Relationships with peers, another worry. Natural disasters. Now, a point that I want to make there is about TMI, too much information. The higher the level of intelligence that child has, the more important it becomes to filter and limit the information that the child is exposed to. Okay, what's going on right now? This is a big thing that you can use for that. If you've got a child that's fairly intelligent that brings that stuff in, unfortunately, they will lock themselves in and gather all that information just like some adults. and that's where a lot of anxiety will come from. I want to show you something real quick here. ADAA.org is a great site, if I can find it. So I'm going to show you this here. So it's actually one and the same site. Anxiety and Depression Association of America is also anxiety. It has two separate forums and stuff with the same acronym, but this is a great site, the ADAA.org. And if you're looking for specifically how do I interact with my child, how do I with everything that's going on, if you go to this site, you're going to get a lot of videos, a lot of blog posts from the top people in our profession, giving you some insight as to how to deal with some of the stuff that's very unique to what's going on right now. So I suggest you kind of take a look at that. When we get to the end of the presentation, I'll open things up for some Q&A, and you're more than welcome to ask some questions that pertain to kind of what's going on, more specifically what may be happening in your household right now. So moving on, the separation anxiety, health, grades, these are some things that your child will worry about. Separation anxiety is that worry about what's next, worry about the future. So when that's coming up, you can anticipate. Performance in sports, punctuality. And the comment I want to make there is it pertains to what Daniel Siegel refers to as the river of harmony. And it's the river of harmony is kind of that where that brain is integrated from top upstairs to downstairs, from your intellectual brain to your emotional brain. And the point about punctuality is it can be about a lot of things that we get rigid about. And if we're rigid about being on time, and there's so many other things that we can put in that same boat, if we start to get rigid about that, or start to teach our children to be rigid, or this is right, this is wrong, this is the way you do it, this is not the way you do it, then you're going to start to give them tendencies to move towards that shore of rigidity. Okay, the shore of chaos is when that emotion takes over. And I've got a clip coming up with Daniel Siegel that will give you a little highlight on what happens when the emotional brain takes over. Phobias, irrational about the situation or object. That can kind of come from a traumatic experience. One common one with children is they can have a bad experience with a dog, either just barking or just scaring them. It can be a large dog when they're very small or something like that. It doesn't have to be a situation where the dog bites or anything like that. It's how they perceive the situation. It can create a phobia, just like many other things. And another thing, what will a child worry about? Well, let me ask you, what will you worry about? Because they will be an extension of what goes on with the people that are eminent in their life. And if you have certain worries and you demonstrate them, you show them, they feel that coming from you, then you're going to hand off some of those anxieties. You're going to hand off some of those worries to them. Sources and risk factors. So how do we get this anxiety, and what makes some people more susceptible to higher levels of anxiety or diagnoses than others? Genetic factor, that's built in. That's going to be something that comes from a blood relative that may have had anxiety. That's something you'll get on the questionnaire form, if not in the first session with a therapist. Do you have any relatives that have mental health issues or conditions? That gets you in the category called predisposed. So you're predisposed to getting it. Doesn't mean you're automatically going to get it, but it means you have a higher chance. The biological factor, brain chemistry and wiring. Now, that can come to you at birth, but one thing that's a little different with that from the genetic material is that we know that that can actually happen when you're in the womb. The mother can actually experience trauma of any sort, and that can actually come through and change the wiring and change the brain chemistry. Now that's not the genetic material. One of the major things we look at is just the size and shape and activity of the amygdala, which is kind of the main component of that lower brain that senses fear and safety. So the next thing here is trauma, source and risk factor trauma. Children who endured abuse or trauma or witnessed traumatic events are at higher risk of developing anxiety disorder at some point in their life. The same trauma will affect each child differently, and that comes back to the first two, the genetic factors and the biological factors, as well as some other things that we're going to talk about as we go through here. Divorce really is another version of trauma as far as my mindset goes. So you can kind of read the same sentence there, that it's going to put them at higher risk of developing anxiety disorders. Personality. Individuals with certain personality types are more prone to anxiety disorders than others. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. That falls under the category of attachment. And we know that from research that a secure attachment is going to give you the greatest weapons to fight off anxiety or the growth of anxiety disorders. Mirror neurons. So when I finished that last slide before this one, I said, what are your anxieties, the people that are around this child that can affect this child? Well, from research, one of the things that we found is mirror neurons. And these are brain cells. And the very interesting thing about them is they will fire in the same manner, whether the individual is performing a task or simply observing the task or behavior. So we learn from everybody around us, everybody in our lives. And the more time we spend with somebody, probably the more that we're going to emulate them. And who can affect an individual? Parents, siblings, any other caregivers. You've got babysitters, you've got grandparents in there, teachers, coaches, relatives, and therapists. And another point I want to make here is we say neurons that fire together wire together. And that kind of goes a little bit, they're similar to the mirror neurons, but what's important there is to realize that events that come to us in our life, the brain reacts and molds. We've learned that we call it neuroplasticity. It's plastic, it can be molded. So even if it's predisposed to being anxious, we can actually mold that brain to make it much less and less apt that we're going to be anxious. An example of the fire together, wire together, I can ask you the question, what is your favorite color? And I know that most likely your favorite color came from a positive event in your life that you associated. So maybe your room was your sanctuary when you were a child, and your room had the colors blue. And my favorite color is blue. And we can dig a little bit deep, but we may get to that point. Same thing, what's your least favorite color? Do you have a color that you hate? Or listen to the words of people that actually say, I hate this. Sometimes that's an indication that they had something that fired together in a situation that was unpleasant, that was bad. So what are some ways in which the parents can help? Personalize and externalize. Ask your child to give anxiety a name. The one that I kind of throw out there is the worry monster. Oh, it looks like the worry monster is with us. Ask your child to give anxiety a name. Your child can draw a picture of anxiety too. So let's say it was the worry monster. Have your child draw a picture of the worry monster. What does that look like? Then help your child acknowledge anxiety when it rears up. There's the worry. The worry monster is getting to me. Labeling and distancing anxiety can help your child learn to be the boss of it. So if you separate it, you're much more apt to conquer it. Okay, so the next one is preview anxiety-provoking situations. Consider meeting camp counselors or touring new places ahead of time. So this really goes hand in hand. If the higher that level of anxiety with the child, the more you need to think about previewing things or planning things. What are we going to do tomorrow? Is there a change in schedule tomorrow? Is there somebody else picking you up or bringing you to school, or are we going to take a different path? The more you recognize levels of anxiety are a little higher in this child or individual, then the more we need to come into that preview or planning to help reduce that anxiety. Model confidence. Children are emotional Geiger counters. They register anxiety radiating from parents. Try to be mindful of what you model through words and body language, working on tempering over-anxious reactions when appropriate. So model confidence. I think self-awareness is a big one there. So what situations are anxiety provoking for you, and having that calm demeanor going into it. Even it's okay to have that conversation. You know, this is something that brings me a little worry, brings me a little anxiety. Be honest. So narrate the world. Children are coding the world, particularly through early childhood. Their brains are just sponges, taking everything in. Says Dr. Potter, we can help them with the narrative they're constructing. Is the world a safe place or a dangerous place where I have to go and be on guard at all time? So narrate the world. We want the world to be a safe place. We want them to view everything as something that's safe and secure. Practice exposure. Gradual exposure helps rewire an anxious brain and shows a child he can survive in anxious moments. Let's say your child is anxious about talking in public, ducking his head and squirming if addressed. Pick a pleasant, slow-paced restaurant for a fun weekly day. Then coach your child to take charge of ordering foods he likes in small steps. At first, he might whisper the order to you and you relay it to the waitress. Next, he might order just his drink or dessert, or finally a full meal all by himself. So find the areas where they are anxious and work on those things, kind of small steps, exposure from small to big. I'm going to come back. The whole brain approach. I'm going to play the video here with Dan Siegel. So this is that, remember the top brain, bottom brain, the intellectual brain, and the emotional brain. So he's going to give you kind of how it's actually good. We even teach children this so that they're aware that, hey, they're not always connected. So I'm going to play that here. See if I can get, also stop this for a second. And I need to, try that again. Wasn't expecting a password from you there.
The upstairs brain can control what's happening in the downstairs.
That's why it's over top of it.
That's why it's over top of it.
You can also control the volume on your side.
That's the reason it's there. It's actually the reason we can all sit in an auditorium like this for 2.5 hours rather than looking for berries or something. So we have this cortex, right? So now what happens is, if this thing is firing enough, this downstairs brain is firing enough. Here's what happens. It fires, 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 fires. And pretty soon, it's going to make it so the ability of my upstairs brain to maintain the coordination and balance of the downstairs brain gets a little on the edge. And think of the experience of someone hanging off a cliff, right? You're hanging on, you're still hanging on, you're still hanging on, you're still hanging on, and you can feel yourself shaking. But what happens when you let go?
Yeah, eventually you.
When you let go, you are going. It's the same way with the upstairs brain. It holds on, it holds on, it holds on, it holds on. There's a bunch of parents smiling, so you know what's about to happen. This is not what's talking about our brains. It's holding on, it's holding on, it's holding on, and suddenly the firing from the downstairs brain is too much. The grip is lost. And watch what happens. This is why it happens so quickly, you guys. this now no longer is coordinating and balancing it. That's the first thing. So now this is now erupts out because it's no longer contained, which turns this way, way off. So within 2-3 seconds, you go from kind of being a reasonable human being to flipping your lid. Has this happened to any of you? And let me just remind you, just because I know we probably won't talk about it, it's worth just saying, I'm going to give you the list of the scientific things. We didn't put all this in the book. Oh, actually, we did put this in the book, but not as a list. Here are the 9 functions that this upstairs brain part right here behind your forehead allows you to achieve. Watch what happens if I can help my daughter Maria keep her upstairs brain working well so she's coordinated, balanced. She'll have these 9. But if her downstairs brain is so agitated and I can't help her name it to tame it, and I can't connect and then redirect, if I can't do that stuff, she may get really agitated and she may start throwing things and have a big temper tantrum and do all sorts of stuff. And like, oh my God, I have a kid with, the dysregulation disorder or something like that. You know, because it's all about relationships. I mean, there are people with disorders like that for sure, but I always want to ask, what's happening in a relationship first? So here's the 9 functions. Number 1, if she can maintain that, and if I as a parent can maintain it, I can regulate my body. I literally have 2 branches of the nervous system that are the brakes and the accelerator of the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic and sympathetic branches. Anyway, basically it makes my heart rev up and my lungs breathe faster and my intestines churn, or it calms all that stuff down. And how you balance the brakes and accelerators is basically how you regulate your body. All happens from here down. The upstairs brain is the master controller of that. So if you lose that function, you could just be totally out of control. That's number 1. Number 2 is the ability to tune into someone else. So at the moment Maria comes home, she's telling me about what happened at school. If I've had a bad day, or I'm really agitated, or I want this to be my perfect daughter, or I was rejected as a kid and I can't stand the feeling that my rejected child's invoking in me because I didn't want to think about my own rejection because I was just fired at work, or I was rejected when I was a kid, or whatever the issue is, and I can't stand it like that, then at that moment, I can't attune to her. This is what this area allows. This area allows you to literally tune into the internal experience of another person. Make a map in your own mind of not only the feelings that another person might be having, and that's called compassion, feeling with, but also to imagine what it's like to be in the mental life of this other person. That's called empathy. So attunement is the gateway to both those things. So it's this balance between rigidity and chaos. This is called, that's emotional balance. This is the part of the brain we know from science allows you to achieve that. And this is the part of the brain, this whole talk is about how you develop this in your child. Okay, so that's number 3. Number 4 is called response flexibility. Number 4, if you think about this area in Maria's brain, this is the area right here that allows you to take an impulse and put a space between an impulse and an action. Right? It allows you to choose all the different possible responses you have. Think about the various ones and say, I think I'll choose that one. You know the marshmallow experiment? You guys don't know that? Some people are not. So let me just remind you. A guy studied, I think it was 2 or 3-year-olds, gave them a marshmallow, said, hey, if you can wait a little bit, I'm going to come back with another marshmallow. You can have 2 of them. And then he left. And then they just filmed the kids. And then he studied them when they're like 25, 30 years of age. The kids who did not eat the marshmallow did better in every aspect of doing better in their lives. Better relationships, better work thing, better academic achievement, better everything. Better
Marshmallows are that powerful.
Marshmallows.
That's
because it's important to eat 2 of them. That's it. So what's the deal? They had response flexibility. Yeah. They could say, something, I'd love to eat this marshmallow, but I think I'll wait.
So already at that age, they had developed.
Already, because this develops at 18 months of age.
It doesn't stop developing.
Doesn't stop developing until 19 months. But
no,
just kidding.
I think mine is still developing.
Right, it develops throughout the lifespan.
Yeah.
But the idea is it starts developing around 18 months to about 24 to 36 months. Right, so they were studying these kids that had it. It's directly related to attachment experiences. Now, obviously, temperament would also influence that too. Okay, so that's response flexibility. Number 5 is the ability to calm fear. literally, as I mentioned, there are these fibers that go from this upstairs brain down to the downstairs brain, the amygdala, and they squirt inhibitory peptides called GABA is one example. Gamma aminobutyric acid. I don't even know that. Why am I saying it? This is I've got so many hats on. Anyway, it squirts a substance to the fear part of the brain that calms it down. That's how you actually overcome fear. You don't actually, it looks like you don't change your downstairs brain, which encoded the fear. You teach your upstairs brain to interpret the context as not finding the downstairs brain response useful, and you tell it to chill out.
And that can come through relationship.
And that comes through relationships.
All right. Where am I at? There we go. So hold on 1 second. I'm going to come back in. Just clicking those off right there. Okay, so that's a little taste of Dan Siegel's whole brain approach. The upstairs brain, downstairs brains. You can see really with the anxiety, what you're losing is that ability to control or have that control over that downstairs brain. And if that comes off, he's basically just numbering, and he only got up through, I think, 6. The list of things that you lose all the control of all those things, because now the downstairs brain is running the house. All right, so we're moving down. So we did a little bit of practice exposure. Avoid labeling your child. Labeling children, I guess you're not really mechanical. You know, you're not really a very good writer, are you? Yeah, you're just, you're not very good at math. As soon as you do that, you reinforce that you've kind of pigeonholed them in that space. Because again, their brains are developing, and they're going to take what you say as truthful and honest and firm. That, you know, think of how many things that you probably took with you into your adulthood that maybe, you know, my dad, he didn't think I was mechanical. So I didn't even try to really be mechanical until I was an adult. And I was like, yeah, I can do this stuff. We got YouTube. I can figure this out. But when I was in my teens and stuff, working on my car, and Dad was pretty much, no, you're not very mechanical. And that's where it stuck right from there. So avoid labeling. So we come down to the next one. Choices lead to control, and that leads to building self-esteem. When you're parenting, you want to create choices, not just boundaries. Much better to go with choices. And when you're teaching them choices in the beginning, they will learn to make better choices as they progress. And when you're making choices as a child, as a teen, you have control over your life. I remember what we said earlier as far as the path to depression, to hopelessness, is the lack of control. So when you are just all about, don't do this, and this is the rule, and that's this, and you can't touch that, and no, don't do this, those lack of control, boundaries. And so choices to control, to building self-esteem. Remember the true meaning of discipline. So that came from disciple is what? Disciple is the student. To discipline is to teach. I mean, we've got it all backwards, or at least we've certainly evolutionized that word to mean something completely different. We usually think of consequential discipline. You know, you're going to get punished if you do it wrong. And they are the disciple, the child. And quite often the caregivers, the parents, we need to look for these situations that come up. We need to look for the lesson to teach. How do I teach them a lesson here? Not how to punish them or put in some sort of, I'm going to take this away or whatever, so that you don't do this again. That's not the goal. The goal is not for them not to do it again. The goal is for them to learn the lesson so that they will choose not to do it again. And along those lines, I'm going to play another clip here. This is actually, Dan Siegel is usually co-authored with Tina Bryson and Tina Payne Bryson. And I've got about, I think, 5 books, and they're all wonderful for parenting. But this is going to be her excerpt. This was actually shortly after the No Drama Discipline book was released. So this is going to be a little excerpt from her.
Drama Discipline with Dr. Dan Siegel. And it has been such a blast to talk about this book out in the world to parents and educators and mental health people and camps and all kinds of audiences. And here's the basic bottom line. Here's sort of my to the core what the book is about. And that is this, that when I say discipline, most people think the word that they associate with that is punishment or consequences. But discipline is teaching. It's skill building. And so when we actually think about discipline moments as moments to teach and build skills, then we can think about it like this, that if we are effective disciplinarians, and by disciplinarian, of course, I mean teacher and skill builder, then we're going to be disciplining less over time. Because as we teach and build skills, our children begin to do that for themselves. They become self-disciplined or self-taught. They've built skills for themselves that they can use in everyday moments. Now, here's the deal. Most of what we do in the name of discipline is very counterproductive because we do it in ways that make it unlikely for our children to even learn. So if we're going to be effective disciplinarians, teachers, then our children have to be in a frame of mind in which to learn. So here's a way to think about it. That if it's all about teaching, and if the brain is either in a receptive state in which it can learn, or it's in a reactive state in which it can't learn, this is a whole new way to think about discipline. A lot of bad behavior or problematic behavior happens because a child is in a reactive brain state. And so if I want to be an effective teacher, then one of the first things I have to do is help my child get into a receptive state so that they can learn. And one of the best ways to get a kid into a receptive state, and by the way, this works for adults too, is to connect with them, to bring empathy, to bring validation, to bring the 4 S's of attachment that Dan Siegel talks about, where kids feel safe and secure and seen and soothed. So in the name of discipline, one of the first things I might have to do, even in the face of problematic behavior, is soothe, bring empathy, bring connection, just like I would if they were physically hurt. But if they're in states of emotional distress, but it comes out as more aggressive behavior or disrespectful tone of voice or those kinds of things, still, in order for me to be effective in teaching them better ways to handle themselves in those moments, I may first start with empathy and connection and soothing. You're having such a hard time. What's going on with you? How can I help? You're so mad. I'm right here with you. Those kinds of things. And when we do that and we offer connection and empathy, and we help soothe them when they're in states of reactive brain activity, then they can move into a receptive place where they're calm, where they can learn. And that's where the discipline happens. That's where I can say, I know you know it's not okay to hit your brother, so what was going on for you? What can you do to make things right? What can you do differently next time? And to have that kind of a reflective dialogue. Obviously, this would be for a child who was verbal and could do those kinds of things, but we can lay the groundwork, even when they're little, in simpler language along those lines. If the whole point of discipline is to teach, my child has to be in a receptive state of mind. One of the best ways to get someone into a receptive state of mind is through connection and soothing. And then once the child is in that state of mind, that's where we address the behavior. We address how their behavior affected others. We address how they can do things differently in the future. And once we've taught and built skills, we've done our discipline. We are done. We can move on. And I want to encourage you to know that it's okay if you don't know what to do in any particular moment. We often have instincts that aren't great, or we're often kind of in a reactive state of mind ourselves. But if we can keep teaching and skill building in mind, it will often change significantly how we discipline. Because a lot of what we do in the name of discipline is actually make kids more reactive, which means it's going to be less likely for them to learn. Hold teaching and skill building in mind and know that one of your best discipline tools is connection, soothing, and empathy. I encourage you to go to my website, tinabryson.com, or check out the book, No Drama Discipline, to learn.
Cool. So that was Tina Bryson. So you can see that that's actually comes back to what Dan Siegel was talking earlier. What she's talking about connection is when they're having that emotional outburst or when they've lost that connection, the connection piece is bringing that top brain back into connection with the lower brain. So that's really the connection we're talking about. And so one of the terms that she used was connect and redirect. That's the first job when you're intervening with somebody. And again, all these apply to adults too. When you come with somebody that you can tell that the emotional brain has taken over, that empathy and that validation, that connection is very important. You're upset right now. I get that. I would be upset too in this situation. I was upset one time when this happened, and I can see what you're talking about, validation. Another thing that we came across, I think, with her and then also Dan Siegel, they mentioned the term, and these comes from their books also, name it to tame it. When you do get to that connection piece, or even in the process of connecting, if you can name the feeling, as soon as, especially if they can name it and they can recognize, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling angry, well, you just connected more. As soon as you make that, that's going to be a connection piece. Name it to tame it. You'll get better connection from top to bottom, and usually the inhibitors will start to kick in that Dan Siegel was talking about. So you're going to have just a reduction in the overall stress and the overall anxiety of the individual and all the body symptoms that we'll analyze to see that. Another point I wanted to make here was that I want to make sure that's made during this lecture is when the child is having these disabers, whether they're being disruptive, disobedient, tantrums, anything like that, a lot of times as adults, especially parents, it's the individual, we tend to avoid or respond in a way that this is not permissible. I don't love you the way you are now. And that's something you need to take a step back and look at, because aren't you supposed to love them regardless, for whoever they are at any point in time? So is that check off? Are you going to take a time out from that love when they're behaving a certain way? So make sure your actions, your words, they'll define that. So that's another reason to kind of, in these situations, the teacher is going to be important to kind of keep that on you. If both parties flip the lid, bad things happen. All right, let's see if I get through on that. So the last one on here was build a secure attachment. And so attachment theory, secure attachment versus insecure attachment. Now we know already that 50 to 60% of our population has a general secure attachment. It comes from a sense of security, a sense of safety, a sense of love, and not just for self, but for the world around you and the people around you. So secure versus insecure, we have different types of insecure attachments. And I think it's important to know, so the latest research has kind of brought up one little nugget here, that we tend to, when we talk about this, talk about secure and insecure and the different types of insecure attachments, it's important to know that these are actually can be completely different in the same household, same child, two different caregivers. They can have one attachment style for one caregiver and a different attachment style for the other caregiver. So that attachment, yeah, we have our general foundation. This is kind of who I am. but it also will vary depending on the relationship, depending on who we are interacting with. So know that. That's something that's kind of recent. Types of insecure attachment: ambivalent. Initially, it was called anxious, but because of anxiety and other relations to anxious, we changed it to ambivalent. Avoidant and disorganized. So ambivalent or anxious typically comes from a situation where the caregivers were unpredictable, unreliable, or they were anxious themselves. As far as that goes, you can also think of the rigidity stuff, right? It has to be this way. It shouldn't be that way. You should behave this way, not that way. The avoidant child, and this is just skimming the surface, the avoidant child did not receive much attention or compassion. And so they're usually more independent. And what they learned from the avoidance, the parents that didn't give them as much love, affection, comfort, closeness, weren't really there for them all the time during tough times. We're not reliable in that respect. So what they learned was to keep feelings inside. And just like Dan C was talking about the other stuff, this can come into a certain state by age 2. Now that doesn't mean that they're stuck like that for the rest of their life. It's still something that will be moldable and pliable, but these categories can be defined by age 2. Disorganized, that comes from that fear of caregiver. So that's a real tough situation because you want comfort from that person that's there, the caregiver, and yet you're afraid of them for whatever reason. That doesn't have to be necessarily physical abuse or something like that. It can be just yelling or language, or again, it can come back to that biology and genetic situation where I'm a little more predisposed to interpret something as something that's scary. So what can be done to build a secure attachment? Well, one of the things we look back at childhood from a therapist talking to adults, we ask the questions, well, were your caregivers intrusive or neglectful? So those are kind of the two things that tend to move people away from that secure attachment. So we want to find that parenting style that's not over-parenting or intrusive and not neglectful, especially during tougher times. So quality time together. Affection is a big one. And from the eye gaze to the hugs to kissing, that is huge, especially if they're having tough times. But anytime, that should be, the more you can get that as a natural process, the more you're going to build that secure foundation. Avoid the 4 horsemen. 4 horsemen are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So even in your conversations with your children or even with your spouse in front of the children, you want to avoid those things. And then again, remember the river of harmony, trying to avoid that shore of rigidity and know what to do when you get to the shore of chaos. So this is, these next couple of pages here are from the recent book that was published by Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson, The Power of Showing Up. And really, all the stuff that they brought to us with the whole brain child and no drama discipline. They also have the yes child or yes brain, which is just another recent one, just a couple of years ago. And brainstorm, which is great for teens. Well, this one really brings in the attachment theory and folds it into everything that they kind of present so far. And I'm just going to give you a couple of snippets. And really it focuses on what you can do from parenting to build that secure attachment, which is the ultimate goal. And I'll make sure I say it now. It only takes one person. It only takes one person to give them that secure attachment. They only need one secure source to build that secure attachment. So the 4 S's, and I think Tina mentioned it briefly in her lecture. Safety, to feel safe. They feel protected and sheltered from harm. Seen, they know you care about them and pay attention to them. Soothed, they know you'll be there for them when they're hurting. Secure, derived from the 3 previous S's, they trust you to predictably help them feel at home in the world then learn to help themselves feel safe, seen, and soothed. Okay. So what are the benefits of a secure attachment? This is directly from their book. These are the items that they put up here. Self-esteem, emotional regulation, academic success, coping with time. Some of these are specifics to the age groups from the research that's presented. Positive engagement with preschool peers. That's a tough time to start developing social relationship. Closer friendships in middle childhood, middle school. More effective social interaction in adolescence. Better relationships with parents. Strong leadership qualities. Greater sense of self-agency. More trusting, less hostile adult romantic relationships, more empathy, greater social competence overall, and greater trust in life. It's an outstanding book. And the second chapter really gives you everything you need to know. It's the biggest chapter, and it's all the scientific background from attachment. So then they kind of get off, and in all their books, they typically will bring up scenarios to help you go through different situations and how to apply. Coping and soothing skills for children. Self-care. This is something we use with children, teens, adults. First session, or first early on sessions with therapy work. Self-care. How you doing? Are you sleeping? What can we do to improve your sleep? Nutrition. Are you eating well? Are you eating regularly? And exercise. Yes, exercise. It's a big one. Especially if you start to see the anxiety in the individual, becomes that much more important, that it will combat, it'll help bring that down a little bit. Screen time, I'm gonna give another page up here just specifically for this. And I know that's a tough one right now with what's going on, but no excuses. I mean, we have to add some screen time for the educational piece, but you really need to be aware of what's going on beyond that, as far as the time and what happens as a result of it. Mindfulness, breathing exercises. We're not talking age limits here. This is stuff that if most of our worries come from worried about the future or about what has happened in the past, then mindfulness, being mindful of the present moment, and usually we start those with just breathing exercises, feeling the breath moving in and out. Am I thinking about the future or the past? No, I'm teaching my brain to stay in the moment. And if I can teach my brain to do that more and more, I'm going to make better decisions, and I'm going to keep that connection from upstairs to downstairs. Meditation and yoga are extensions of that. The awareness wheel. This is a good one for coping skills. This is a good one for right now, because I can tell you a lot of people, the awareness wheel, I'm sitting on the hub. Where do I take my attention, my thought, my awareness? Where do I take it? And I can take it to an infinite number of points on the wheel. And there's some people right now that are spending way too much time focused on one point on the wheel. And where is that? It's called COVID-19 right now. Okay? They're staying with that way too much. Give yourself a limit to certain things, especially now what's going on. It's important to get the information, but maybe half hour in the morning, half hour at night, or an hour in the morning to catch up on the news, and that's it. Put it aside. You can use more than just the wheel. If you're sitting with a child, the blades of grass. If you're in the car and it's raining, the drops on the windshield. Where else can you take your thoughts right now? Name the anxiety. We talked about that. To distance it and conquer it, it's good to name it. And I use the worry monster as it's also good to draw it and whatnot. Replace the behavior. Don't just look to take away something that's their behavior. Most of the time we need to replace it. If we don't replace it, it's going to come back. So you got to find a positive or some other behavior there that's less anxiety or less stressful, that kind of thing. Soothing, stress ball or stuffed toy, something usually. The paintbrush is really good because it gives them a good sensation against the skin. They can use the bristles. Anchor, this is kind of a combination of having that object, but have the object represent something, a positive thought or positive memory. So you start with that. What's your favorite memory? What's your favorite thought or person? And let's see if we can create something. Depends on where you want to take this, if you want it with them all the time and in the pocket, or if it's something you need at home and it's a stuffed animal, as far as what that anchor piece is, but that's another coping skill mechanism. All right, so screen time. 18 months or younger, no screen time. Absolutely not. Except for video chatting with grandparents, we'll allow for that. Video chatting, if it's a little bit here and there, that's okay. All right, 18 to 24 months of age is where we start to introduce some screen time with supervision and guidance. So with, hey, this is what's going on here, and see that, and this and that, yeah, not without that. So that's up to 2 years. And from age, up until age 2 to 3, only 1 hour maximum. Okay, when you're thinking of screen time, it's important to know content and quality, okay? So content is usually what we talk about. Are we watching something educational? Are we using the screen, as in today, we're doing education at home, distance learning, stuff like that, okay. Versus, horror flick, or if I'm doing video games and stuff like that. So that's gonna be your content. But quality is also important. So if I move down here to the next one, content, things to consider. So distance from the device for eye strain, and as also the blue light effects, as well as the charging effects if the device is being charged. That does affect this affects brain chemistry, that plasticity we're talking about, in a negative way. I'm making sure down here. So as far as that quality goes, we want to limit the blue light exposure, limit the frame rate and whatnot. So TV screens are going to be a much better source of screen, easier on the brain, easier on the eyes than computers. Computers better than tablets. Tablets better than the phone. Okay. Make sure you have non-electronic times, and make sure you lead by example. And we're just going to touch, I can do a whole lecture on screen time, but so video games and violent movies are probably the worst type of content as far as what happens. And some video games, you have to realize they're made and promoted almost like smoking and coffee. They have an addiction component built in to actually build addiction into the brain chemistry. So that should tell you something. If the people that are making the games are putting into into the games themselves, that should tell you something. That Fortnite game kind of comes to mind. As far as the content, there's a good source, Common Sense Media. If you're not sure about programs or apps and stuff like that, I think that's based on what I've read. I haven't actually checked it out myself, but that when I was researching that seemed to be a good site to go to check for content value. And then if you are giving them screen time, ideally you're having them earn that time. And as far as what's going on right now today, it's if you say you have to, well then what would you do if we didn't have it? What if everything crashed on the electronics and bandwidth and Wi-Fi, all that stuff crashed right now? What if you had to take yourself back 30 years and we put ourselves in the same situation? I think you would come up with some ideas. Where would you go? And then we're almost done here, but seeking professional guidance. If you recognize that the anxiety levels are a little bit challenging and you want to seek that professional guidance, these are some questions to ask as far as the people that you're going to. Do you specialize in working with children? What is your background in working with anxiety? What is your basic approach to treatment? It doesn't have to be a specific modality, but they may throw out a few different modalities that they do, or the general approach of how they assess and how they put together a treatment plan. And do you include family members in the process? I think that's important to get a yes to some extent, because, or at least that it depends, because think of the lecture we just presented and the people that are around the child that can have an impact. Not only in a negative way as far as developing anxieties, but also in a positive way as far as assisting them getting out of that. So if we're only meeting with the child, then we're not really optimizing the process of change. How frequent are the sessions, the length, the cost, insurance? What is your general approach to medications? Remember rigidity, guys. So going into that situation as parents or caregivers, try not to be yes or no or for or against medications. Just keep an open mind. I'm not saying I'm for or against it, but certain situations, the anxiety is really high and we've done everything else, and let's see what happens here. Let's start with a low dose and see what happens. If we see some positive change, we don't see a lot of negative symptoms, then let's stay with that for a little while, and then we can take it off at a certain period of time, that kind of thing. That usually comes from psychiatrists. So that's a referral out, but the therapist will usually have that referral list. Are you able to prescribe or refer if this becomes an option? How will I know if my child is improving with treatment? I think we talked about some of the behaviors of anxiety, so I think you can now kind of have an idea of what you would see in terms of a reduction in anxiety. But what is the anticipated length of the treatment process? I think that's, again, well, that depends, but what does it depend on? And what the answer to that, I think, will give you some comfort or confidence in the individual that you're potentially looking to hire to work with your child. So this is some books and online sources. You'll see that 4 of those books are the Dan Siegel and Tina Bryson books. The most recent, if you got to pick up one and get the attachment concept, is The Power of Showing Up, but I do recommend all of them. If it's more about, hey, a lot of behaviors we need to get in line, then jump into that No Drama Discipline to get some ideas of how to work that situation from the whole brain perspective. The How to Raise an Adult is a wonderful book that's actually written by the Dean of Freshman Students at Stanford, Julian Lithcott Holmes. And it presents a very good, especially for the Bay Area here, a good insight as to kind of what happens with overparenting, that intrusiveness, and how to kind of back off and give your child more choices so that they can become an adult and not maintain that child-parent relationship forever. Mindset by Carol Dweck, that's good for getting the growth mindset concept. And what that is a lot of times we teach children about perfectionism too much. We highlight mistakes, and you can't, mistakes, it's the concept of making mistakes a part of the learning process, accepting them. The ADAA, Anxiety Disorders Associated in America, is also the Anxiety and Depression Associated in America. Same website, it's wonderful. And then another good resource is Psych Alive with Lisa Firestone. And get on YouTube, because you can search Daniel Siegel and Tina Bryson, Lisa Firestone. You can search these authors all day and watch some great video content. I showed you a couple right there. We are at the conclusion of the lecture. So again, you may want to write down my email or phone number. Feel free to text or call me with any questions. So you can stick around. We're going to do a little Q&A session. But if you email me, I can send you either the link to the video, which I'll have no later than sometime tomorrow at the latest. And if you want it, I can give you the actual copy of the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so I'm going to stop the screen share and so what I will do here, your mute button is, I'm going to unmute all at first. Actually, no, I'm going to keep you guys. What I'd like to do is, where's my chat? Okay, where'd that go? There it is. How many we got? 15. I think we should be okay if you guys want to, I will, what I would suggest, I can unmute you, but I think you should be able to unmute yourself. And then if you want to put your video on, you're more than welcome. If you do put your video on, I would go ahead. We have 15, so I think the bandwidth is going to be okay for 15. I've been in some meetings with 15 and we've had no problem, especially at this time of day. So what I would recommend is if you want to ask a question, then turn your mic off. And if you're not speaking, then turn your mic to mute. So there's usually a raise hand function, but for some reason I don't see it. I opened participants and chats. So I've got the chat window and the participant open. So does anybody have any questions if you want to turn your mic off? And if you want to put your video on, you're welcome to. And if you do that, if enough of us do that, just put the gallery view if you like. You may see the raise hand function, but I don't see it offhand. So does anybody have any questions as far as a follow-up or any comments? And just turn your mic off here. I'll unmute all first just to.
We're gonna go read a book.
So what I've done is I've unmuted all. So if you've got some background, if you want to mute it, I didn't know if that was the limiting factor as far as nobody speaking up right away. So do you guys have any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
This is Teacher Alice. Thank you.
You can turn your video on if you want to. Otherwise, just go with the vocal.
Okay. I wanted to talk about the anxiety monster.
The worry monster. Yeah.
Worry monster, yeah. Because I've noticed that with our students and sometimes even with my teenage son. So I wanted to know if you had any anecdotes of how you dealt with people discussing about, you know, naming and taming the anxiety monster, or if you wanted to elaborate. Sorry, the worry monster.
I think it's a set. Well, what you have to be careful with is probably not presenting the idea during, you know, in the aftermath would be, I mean, once we're all completely, we can have a discussion about it maybe the next day or something, if something has happened or whatever. So I think that's important, but to talk about the concept. And then I think what we also talked about earlier was actually if it's a younger child, what is that? You can either verbalize through, if it's a younger child, maybe even get the artwork out and have them draw what the worry monster would look like.
Ooh, yeah.
And then if it's an older, if I'm working with a teen, I would say, what do you think that would look like? You know, how would you, I mean, and a lot of times we'll come up with characters or cartoon characters, or if there is a character in a film or an animation or something that you've seen, what would that look like? To give them a visual, it's important. So even whether they're drawing it, you know, themselves, or if it's coming up with a character from a movie or just a combination of characters. Well, this kind of looks like this person, but they have like blue hair, and you'll be surprised how they can really kind of defined. There's a line of therapy called internal family systems that's all about using that trait.
And then if, like, say the child's sort of like in a fetal position, and had you done like the worry monster before? Can you bring it up humorously while they're like intensely in an anxiety attack, or do you want
I don't think so.
Not bring? Okay.
Remember what Dan was
more
talking
of a later.
You've got somebody in the fetal purgatory. You've got them. They're gone right now. I mean, unless it's later. But connect is right there. Connection. Are you really sad? Are you really scared? Because there's a couple of different things that might get you into the fetal position. I mean, that's definitely. Scared, sad. I mean, you probably, if you know what happened before, you can kind of take a guess. You can also guess. You can ask them how they feel, but it's usually easy if you kind of know. So you seem a little sad. Are you a little sad? You know, and let them correct you. But name it to tame it, and then also that connection that starts with that point. Yeah, the worry monster is more like if you're in the car and you're bringing the kids to school and somebody's can you go a little faster, this and that, you know, oh, it sounds like the worry monster is in the car. That's, you know,
okay.
worried about being late, that kind of thing. It's more kind of, oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Let's see one that came up here. And you can use the chat if you like. You can also chat me directly and ask a question if you like. What are ways to connect with a child who is pushing you away or not wanting to use words or tones? Sometimes you need a little, it depends on the circumstances, but pushing away, I think giving them that space, but again, it depends on the circumstances. What's going on and what, again, that's going to be one of those situations where we think of that principle of discipline. okay, in this situation, if I'm the teacher and that's the student, what's the lesson that I want to teach? Is there one here? Or is this simply somebody having a really bad day and tired and irritable, and I just, I need to give them that space. And if they're not used to that affection piece, as far as the hugging and stuff that we talked about that leads to secure attachment, if that's something that's kind of new, and on some of the stuff as far as how we approach discipline and all that thing, if you're going, oh my God, that's okay, better late than never. But to introduce that change, sometimes we got to do it slowly and softly. So you can have that discussion and say, what are you comfortable with? Are you comfortable giving hugs and, stuff like that. You can kind of introduce that closeness if that's another piece. So I'm not sure if they're pushing you away or not wanting to use words or tones, if that's in one incident in a specific situation, or if that's kind of a general. Somebody
I
else?
have a question.
Yeah, go.
Can you talk a little bit about the parent who is encountering the child who is, what is it? You meant it like this, who has let go, who is free fall, reactive, and the parent often will also be there. And can you talk a little bit about how the parent specifically, when you realize you start the reaction, your child's in reactivity, and what might that look like? Well, what would it look like to be in reaction while your child's in reaction? And then what can you do? What's just like an easy?
The connect and redirect is going to be the thing we're looking for. But the thing that there is, while the child just went there, they just lost the connection. So now they're all emotional. So tantrum or what have you. What we want to avoid is the parent going there as well, right? So you're going to have a little bit more capacity to kind of keep that space to make that decision. And most of the time, a lot of the times out there in society, we do kind of go emotional, and it's more of a discipline, the negative way that Tina kind of started off with in her video, that we take. But the idea is to connect first. So if there's room, and depending on the age, if I can get in there and if I can give them a hug, or if I can get not just eye level or below eye level, and start to show compassion and start to say, oh, you look like you're really sad, start to connect with that feeling, right? Name it to tame it. And if you can get in there, so it's going to be a tough situation, especially if that's something you're not used to, because a lot of times, that's what I was talking about earlier, is when that happens, a lot of times that's the stuff we don't want to see. And the child needs to know that you're going to be there for them, even in those situations. Shoot, I just had another thought I was going to throw in too. I lost it.
Well, I would actually, can I follow up with that?
Yeah.
On that? Okay, so let's say you're the parent and you should not be in reactivity. Ideally, you would not be in reactivity. You would keep in mind, oh wait, I'm supposed to be the person who can connect, calm. So what if you are in reactivity?
It's okay to blow it, but ideally, kind of, if you're realizing it during the thing, then you're starting to connect again. So if you lost it and then, okay, no, wait a minute, I just lost it. If I had that connection, I wouldn't have done that a second ago. I wouldn't have yelled or done whatever I did. It's okay. It's in fact very important to come back and use that repair piece to come back later and say, you know what, I blew it right there. That was my bad. I should have been there for you. I should have done it this way, that kind of thing. So it's good to come back and let them know you made a mistake, and that's what happens, because it also makes them a little bit more aware of that whole connection and detached integration concept.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up to the point that teacher Leela was making. If I know that in certain situations I can identify, yes, I'm losing my my patience, or I can kind of detach and see myself. But do you have any tips or tricks or something to quickly detach from that and be able to center myself, to kind of get back to the, I need to I need to connect. I need to not lose my my patients.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the breath is the first thing I would go for, because if you're recognizing, you're kind of, remember that visual of hanging on the edge, I'm just about to lose it. The breath is usually the best thing to go for. And even we work with kids on that too, as far as connecting with the breath, because that gives you a little bit firmer grip and now a little more relaxed and a little more calm. But the recognition is a huge piece. Even if you're recognizing it, it's better than not recognizing it, because that establishes you still have connection there. But where to go? I mean, if you can, where we talked about for the kids, we talked about coping, soothing as the anchor. It doesn't have to be an actual object that represents a thought or memory, but it's that awareness wheel concept. Hey, in those situations, what can I go to? Where can I take my thought that will help me in that situation? And sometimes it's a visual, sometimes seeing your child not as they are necessarily, but see them in a way that you would be more empathetic or more compassionate towards. If that makes sense. If you're dealing with an adult that's kind of having a meltdown, a lot of times seeing them as the 5-year-old that's having a meltdown makes it a little easier to interact with them. And if you're seeing the child that's having the meltdown, sometimes seeing them in a different visual a little bit will help. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah. So one thing is, I got a little more information on what are the ways to connect with a child who is pushing you away and not wanting to use words or tones. And they specified it's only when they are disconnected and angry, usually very receptive to giving and taking affection otherwise. But they switch when they're disconnected. And that's going to be, in your fact, you're going to get that if you get into the teens and you get some defiance and stuff like that, you're going to get a little more of that. And you got to provide them that space and once you have that connection, it doesn't necessarily mean right after that loss of connection or that loss. It doesn't have to be right then. It can be later that night or it can be the next day. Hey, when you're experiencing that, what can I do for you? I want a connection. I want to give you space if you want space. But what can I do? Collaborate with them. Don't force them down a path that they're not comfortable going. But it's okay if somebody doesn't want you there when they're having that trauma and stuff, when they're having that emotional meltdown or whatever it is. It's okay if they're kind of, hey, I don't want you here right now. You can still keep your distance and still say, are you okay? Or, I can understand if you know what brought them to that place, if you can kind of give them a little empathy piece of, what, I can understand why you're upset. It doesn't have to mean you have to approve with the situation. If they're upset because they're not getting something, doesn't mean you have to give them something, but aren't we all upset sometimes when we don't get our way about something? So that's the validation piece. I understand that you're upset right now. I get upset too if I remember this one time when I wanted this and I didn't get this, and just recently in adulthood, that kind of thing. So hopefully that helps a little bit. What else? Anybody else?
Just a practical question. Will you be giving us your slides or some recordings?
Yeah, take my email down. I can put that slide back up, but take my email down. If you shoot me an email, then I will send the copy, whatever you want. If you want both, I can send the copy of the presentation, the slide presentation to you, and the link to this video. If you want to revisit it or send it out to anybody else, you're welcome to. So I'll have that available tomorrow, and whoever sends me an email, I'll shoot it back to them. So I'll put that back up to close out to make sure you get it. In fact, Maggie, if you can send it to the group on the chat, if you can send them.
Sure, I was just going to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, so then they can take it.
Plugging in my
We had to do bedtime, so we missed most of it.
Yeah, huh? That's right.
And I'll post the recording as soon as I have it. So
Okay.
everybody
Good
can
that too. Yeah.
watch
Can
it on their own
everyone-
time.
Can everyone else see the group chat? I clicked on it and it's blank.
Yeah, there's a
Oh,
scope.
because
Yeah,
some
yeah.
of them are sent privately. So if you send it to everyone, it's not going to be private. But if you send it to an individual,
Yep.
then it's going to be private and you won't be able to see. So people were sending me the questions, they were sending it privately. That's why you wouldn't see it. At least that's what I'm guessing as far as why you're not seeing anything.
That's probably it.
Can you talk about meditation, especially for kids? You know, one of the newer apps I think is Calm, C-A-L-M, Calm, and that I think brings in some meditation stuff for kids also. There's quite a few of them out there. Breathe, I think, is another one. I can't get them all off the top of my head. But as far as that connection piece, as far as remember the secure attachment, hey, why not meditate together? Teach them to meditate together. That's time spent together, and that's another quality investment. So there's a lot of good books even on kids meditation, but again, there's good apps too, and I think Calm is one of the better ones just from what I've kind of seen. But meditation can start with mindfulness. Meditation can start with just sitting in a quiet room and breathing. Even if you're the parent and you have the child there, you can actually talk them through the breath. You know, taking that breath in through the nose, channel it to the base. It's important with breathing. It's a little side jump there, but if I'm doing mindfulness breathing, it's important with the breathing to channel the breath down deep, to use your diaphragm so that the inhalation, almost like you're filling, pretend there's a balloon in your stomach and you're inflating that balloon. And then you're exhaling and squeezing the air out of that balloon. So if we can keep our chest quiet, and you can even lay down on your back side by side and have a book on your chest for one meditation series, and just see if we can keep that book really quiet so that we're just breathing in our belly. So we're just breathing diaphragmatically, because your vagus nerve goes through your diaphragm. So the more active that diaphragm is, the more you're actually going to stimulate the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is essentially, it works against the fight or flight, the sympathetic response in your system. So if you activate the vagus nerve, you're deactivating or turning off or preventing from turning on the fight or flight, sympathetic anxiousness, anxiety. So that's why I say that's a good thing to go to. That's where we teach that breath. It's not just, hey, let's focus on something, but it's also that reason, because you're actually, think of it as a switch. It's either sympathetic or it's, relaxation response. But that's a good place to start as far as meditation. It's just the breathing. And you can go further. There's a whole boatload of places you can go to that if you want to do guided or just different things. But it's about staying in the present or staying on one point, but not being judgmental about any other thoughts that come in. So, the untrained mind, the busy mind, the monkey brain is the remote control. It's like watching some TV and somebody's changing the channel. And meditation allows you to stay focused more on one channel and really appreciate that channel, that one, everything about it, all the senses that are going on right now. Think of all 5 senses, and exploring those senses. That's really what meditation is about. And you can take it in all sorts of directions. Any tips for 4 to 7-year-old active boys on how to connect, especially with mothers? Well, quality time, first and foremost. So really, what would you like to do? Asking them if you want to spend time together, and what would you like to do? What would you like? I mean, and sometimes they're going to ask you to go out and throw the ball or play basketball, or sometimes it's reading and playing a video game. Don't be against that. If that's playing time and they've earned it and it's just a minimal time, it's important to kind of know what they're doing. So at least that gives you some insight as far as the games and stuff goes. But collaboration is always a good way to go. Even if you're trying to figure out, what bedtimes and screen times and those kind of things, rather than being the parent and being the authority and the dictator, see if you can collaborate with the children as far as when you're implementing rules and time together and what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. If you can collaborate, you'll run into less problems too, and they'll get a lot more enjoyment out of it. But so 4 to 7-year-old active boys, I would ask them, what are some things you like doing? And then I would go a step further and say, well, what are some things you enjoy doing with me, with mom, and see what you get from that. And then you can be more direct. And it's like, well, I'd like to spend more quality time together. What are some ideas you have and how to do that? So, and see where that goes. So we got the email went out in the chat. Thank you, Maggie. So that's my email. So if you send my email, send me an email, and just let me know. I'll send you the PowerPoint and I'll send you the link. And then obviously Maggie will post the link as well. So, and feel free to send that out to anybody. Any other questions either on the chat or if you want to turn your mic on and ask a question? We're going to finish up.
This teacher Alice again. I just have one more question.
Go for it.
That is kind of a riff on what you were just talking about.
Okay.
At the beginning of your talk, you were talking about how punctuality can cause anxiety. And so we have this funny thing where, you know, the parents are trying to get the children out the door to school in the morning, you know, because we try to start at a certain time or else things go kind of haywire. And I think there's a lot, because they need like a certain, in my classroom, they need a certain amount of free time in order to be ready for whatever curriculum we have at the end.
Yeah.
Free play time. Anyway, I was wondering if you could if you had experiences or ideas about how parents can collaborate with their children to make sure they're not having anxiety around like getting to school or getting in the car seat or getting their breakfast eaten or whatever it is they need to do.
Yeah. First, it's kind of recognize where it comes from, because, excuse me, a lot of times what you have to recognize that the anxieties get amplified. And I think this is important. I'm glad you asked this question just because I wanted to make sure and bring this point forward. I have not yet. If you have some anxiety, in other words, if you as the parent want to make sure your kid gets there on time, what do you think the child is going to develop? Punctuality. Got to get there on time. Got to get there on time. So it's kind of within the lecture. It's kind of, hey, they're watching you. They're picking up things from you. So, and then also your verbiage, be aware of what you're saying, because a lot of times we think we're trying to present an ease for a situation. Oh, everything's going to be fine, and you got so and so over here, and don't have to worry about this. And do you think I'm calming them down? No, I'm building their anxiety. You're talking like this because there's something I need to worry about. So you have to kind of be careful how you present stuff.
Are you saying like their tone?
Not just tone, but even if I'm going to say, okay, now if this happened, no, don't put too much into it. Be more relaxed about it, really. And if you notice that there's a little anxiety coming from them about whatever it is, you can say, are you feeling a little anxiety about something? And then if I said, well, yeah, I'm worried about, or what if I'm late or something? Well, let's think about that. What does happen? And let them be, that's the how to raise it. Let them be the adult and understand what's going to happen and what's the worst case. And sometimes they're going to be talking about, something happened yesterday on the news and they picked up that there was a fire or an earthquake. What happens if there's an earthquake at school? There's a shooter that comes in. Okay, let's talk about that. What do you think would happen? And a lot of times we want to hide things and put things in closet, but no, you want to bring them out and talk about them. And then they'll be a lot more or less calm. But when we try to hide things and prevent things from happening and try to avoid situations where they're going to have tantrums and all that, you're building the anxiety underneath. But as far as the specific situation, the collaboration happens, again, it doesn't happen on the morning to the walk when everybody's late. It happens the night before, hey, we were late this morning. And I noticed you were really upset, or you got really upset, that's something that's a concern for you. So what do you think we should do tomorrow? Should we get up 5 minutes earlier? What are your thoughts? Without even putting suggestions out there, see what they come up with. Should we set a time? What is it? And see what they come up with first. And then you can kind of, well, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And see how they respond. But it's also very good to say, well, what about that worst case scenario? What if we are late? To at least talk through that versus always avoiding, oh my God, you know. So does that help, Alice?
That was good. Thank you.
Okay.
I know that was a kind of ambiguous question, but
Yeah. No, it's good because sometimes you'll open something else I've got. Thank you.
thank you.
All right, guys. Anything else?
Well, I have one question. Actually, I was last weekend, we watched an animation film that was after or during while we were watching it. I realized that it wasn't appropriate, age appropriate, even though it just wasn't age appropriate for my kids, where at my comfort level.
Mm-hmm.
There were guns. It was, Spies in Disguise or whatever that movie was.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I should have watched this first before I had my 4-year-old and 6-year-old watch it.
Yeah.
I could see as the first clip of like black SUVs blowing up.
Yeah.
I could see my 6-year-old being like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like he's never seen those images before, ever. And it doesn't matter that it's animation, it's shocking.
Yeah.
And it was like, and I'm very aware and in tune of my boys' feelings. And I'm hypercritical. I'm always like watching them and analyzing them and being like, oh, how do they feel now? How do they feel now? And so, it was kind of like shocking in some ways because I'm here watching my boys take in this violence. And then I'm watching, my husband laughing. Like there's there's also humor. And so it's like, there's this and then I'm thinking about what are my kids thinking about like us laughing over this violence that's happening anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm not going to do that again, but it's done, that has been, those details have been taken into Spencer's brain, my 6-year-old.
Yeah.
And he, last night when I was putting him to bed, and this was like a few nights after, his fear going to bed is that there's a bad man outside, and he's never had that fear before. And so, I went to the safe and secure place of like the world and like how most people, I don't know. I didn't even know how to go through this because it was my first time. And I said, well, most people in the world are good. I've lived 40 years. I've never had a bad man outside my house. That's a long time to live. I just didn't have, what would you say for dialogue, like those anxieties?
So a couple things, if you recognize it during the film, so I think if it's not too late when you get back or the next day, especially when you get back, especially something like that, I would bring it up as a dialogue in the car back home. Oh my goodness, I didn't really know that this and that. What did you guys think of this? And that's, so talk through it a little bit. Give them some insight, as far as what you think and where reality was in the film and where it wasn't and some of the things that you saw. And then as far as the discussion you had, recognize that it's coming from feelings first. And a lot of times as parents or even in couples and stuff, we get this all the time. That right away we want to rationalize it, teach them things from the highest of our rational brain, from the upstairs, if not the loft. There's a reason why you shouldn't have to be afraid, but no, just kind of take a step back and say, well, you're really, it sounds like you're afraid of something happening. Tell me more about that. What do you think would happen? And let them unfold more, let them give more to really find out the depth and find out the direction, and let them think through it on their own. Let them kind of move into the upstairs a little bit. Remember, they don't have much. It's developing slowly. Doesn't fully mature until mid-20s. So help them kind of develop it. So let them go through that whole process. What would happen, or how realistic do you think that is, or have you ever seen that or heard of it? Stuff like that.
That's good.
And then, okay, if something does happen, what would you do?
That's good, because when you said you don't give too much information, that's where I found, I'm like, oh yeah, like he will, go there with his thought process. If, earthquakes, like anything. And so limiting that information too, by asking him the questions, I guess, how you're rephrasing it will be very helpful.
And that's actually another good point I want to make is a lot of times we talk too much, and instead of asking questions and let them dialogue, it's think of kind of try to limit your words or cap your words, or think of the approach the situation as if you do have a limit. And if you notice yourself talking a lot, kind of step back, go, whoops, see if I can pull back the reins a little bit on that. Because most of the time, if you're talking more than a few sentences, they're just, you're not going to get anywhere.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Thanks, guys. Appreciate you sitting in. And like I said, I think Maggie had an email. I'll put the other screen up for a few more seconds if you need to write anything down. Feel free, as well as if you want to reach out professionally, check my email and stuff. If you have any other questions at any later date, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call, okay? You guys have a great night, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thanks, Brian.